thanks everybody for coming. So I'm Claire Wade, Geological Survey, and today I'll just be going through, I guess, some of the context in the regional geology for this area in the Mulgathing Complex, and really sort of setting that framework for what the stratigraphy is, what the tectonic setting is, and within that context of the nickel and the copper and gold systems. So it's really just an introduction to the talks to come, so they'll go into more detail about a lot of these aspects. But yeah, the work that we've been doing over the last few years have really been focused on understanding the timing and the nature of the setting of the Mulgathing Complex, and we'll just provide an overview for where we are now. So the area that we're focused on today is in the sort of northern central part of the Gawler Craton, and this is a late Archean belt, and within this is the Mulgathing Complex. So these range from late Archean to early Paleoproterozoic, predominantly sedimentary sequences, but there are also volcanic and intrusive rocks within this sequence as well. In the Mulgathing Complex, we have the Challenger gold mine hosted within the sedimentary rocks here. And that sedimentation really extended into the earliest Paleoproterozoic and was ultimately ceased from the metamorphism and deformation during the Sleaford orogeny, that it was around 2460 to 2440 million years ago. So the area that I'll be talking about today is in sort of that western portion of the Gawler Craton and centred around the nickel and the gold prospects that occur within the Mulgathing Complex. So this is broadly within what we would call the Christie domain. And I've got here the total magnetic intensity image because in this area the outcrop is quite patchy, and even though the depth to basement is quite shallow, it can be tens of metres, it is much easier to visualise what's going on in the geology using magnetic images such as these. You can see that there's a bit of variety in the magnetic signature. We'll just be going through what the main packages are within this area with relation to the gold and the nickel deposits. So firstly, just to introduce what these main mineralisation types are, we've got the magnetic nickel sulfides. So these were first identified in the early 1990s by drilling from the department, and a PACE drilling program in the early 2000s by Mithril Resources identified a narrow zone of sulfide mineralisation. And these were hosted in metamorphosed gabbros and pyroxenites that intrude felsic to intermediate granites. What's, I guess, interesting to note is that these bodies are quite readily distinguished on the magnetics. They pop out as these very magnetic zones, and they sort of form a northeast-southwest trending belt going from Aristarchus through to Acacia East. So this could help with identifying those mafic and ultramafic bodies for any future exploration. The second mineralisation style is metamorphosed gold, and the Challenger gold mine is the main example of this type of mineralisation. So the gold at Challenger is hosted by garnet, biotite, gneiss and quartz leucosomes, and the gold is interpreted to be pre-metamorphic, and this is from gold inclusions within garnet porphyroblasts that have been observed at the Challenger deposit. There's also a pre-metamorphic alteration assemblage, so suggests that there was quite a lot of water and there was pre-metamorphic melting associated with this. So it does raise the question of what type of gold deposit it is. Could it represent an epithermal type deposit, or is it like a true Archean orogenic gold deposit? So this is something that we're still working through, and Alex will talk more about this at Challenger and Golf Ball later today. The third style is remobilised gold, and this is represented by the Golf Ball deposit. Again, this is hosted by a micaceous schist with coarse-grained leucosomes, and they contain clots of biotite and quartzite after garnet. And there is evidence for a lot of fluid flux and retrogression that occur during deformation, and some of this could be associated with the Sleaford orogeny, but there's also evidence that this might have been a younger fluid event, so perhaps during the Paleoproterozoic or even the Mesoproterozoic. So it's possible that the gold here could be reworked Archean gold, so gold, for example, from the or formed at the same time as Challenger, or it could have been new gold introduced during these younger events. So if you're a gold or a nickel explorer, you're thinking, what's the relationship between these mineralisation styles? What's the setting? How old are the rocks? And what's the potential for remobilisation? So I'm hoping that at least some of these questions will be answered today as we work towards that clearer understanding of the regional setting within the Mulgathing Complex. So we'll just focus on three main areas in this region, and just walk through what the main lithologies are and where we are with their understanding for today. So I've just divided it broadly into these three zones. We've got a red zone, a green zone and a blue zone. And we'll just go through what the main packages are and what some of the mostly geochronology results that we've got for these areas are. So firstly in this green zone, so this is dominated by metasedimentary and volcanic rocks and hosts both the Challenger and the Gulf Bore deposits. This area is usually what we'd refer to as the bland zone, so it's in quite a magnetically quiet area, but we can see from the new magnetic imagery that there is a lot more detail and complexity to this area than what we had in the previous surveys. The rocks in this area are dominantly sedimentary in origin, but we do have some granitic and potential volcanic rocks that occur within this area as well. So the metasedimentary rocks include a clastic sequence of samite to peelite, so metamorphosed sandstone and shale packages. There's a lot of garnetiferous migmatite and also slimonite, biotite, aluminous metasediments, with the example from Gulf Bore here. And these sequences are what we term as the Christie gneiss. So here are some examples from the Challenger mine that just show that garnetiferous and aluminous nature of those metasedimentary rocks. And locally within these metasedimentary rocks at Challenger, they are sulphide bearing, and there is some pyrite, as well as some other copper iron sulphides, and even some rare nickel sulphides have been observed at Challenger as well. So as I mentioned earlier, the metasedimentary rocks here are dominated by the Christie gneiss. The maximum depositional ages that we have from these 6 areas indicate that the deposition was between about 2535 and 2480 million years ago. And we can see this is pretty consistent across the 6 areas that we've collected the detrital zircon from, as shown by the green peaks in these plots. There's also been 2 phases of metamorphism that have been identified. So one group is a bit older, it's 2565 to 2440, and the second group is 2440 to 2425. This again is quite consistent across the region through the areas that we've collected this data from, except at Gulf Bore, in the 3 samples collected here, in the zircon, there's been no recorded metamorphism of those ages. So also in this zone we do have some magmatic rocks, and they're represented by granite, tonalite and orthopyroxene bearing granite, or sometimes referred to as charnockite, and these are co-magmatic with norite, and these collectively encompass the mobelotonalite. So we do have some geochronology for this unit, and it is a bit complicated. So the original shrimp dates that we had for the mobelotonalite suggested an emplacement age of 2490 million years, with metamorphism at around 2465. However, the new data that we've collected in the last couple of years has found no evidence for the 2490 event, and we've only got 2465 ages, which we've interpreted as being the magmatic crystallisation age. So I guess there's a couple of possibilities. One is that the 2490 ages are truly magmatic, and the 2465 ages, including the new data that we've collected, are actually metamorphic, or the 2465 ages are the magmatic ages and the 2490 are inheritance, because we do see evidence for inheritance in those original shrimp samples going back to about 2500 to 2570 million years. So a couple of possibilities for this one here. So now moving into what I've called the red zone. So this is a lot more complex in its geology. You can see there are major faults and there's isoclinal folding in this area, and it's predominantly made up of meta-igneous units. And I guess also there are no magmatic nickel sulfide or gold prospects known in this region, but we do have some chromium deposits that have been identified in this area. So this is dominated by intermediate to mafic plutonic rocks, so quite similar to the Mobella tonalite, ranging from granite tonalite, orthoperoxine-bearing granites, which are also comagmatic with norite. And we do see a similar pattern of geochronology. So we have a 2490-ish magmatic crystallisation age with that younger metamorphism. So you know, we've got heat and magmatism that are occurring close to the deposition of the sediments in this area. So whether that's you know, related to the onset of that metamorphism, that's something that we're still working through. And the last region is this blue zone in the sort of the southeast area, and it comprises this northeast southwest trending belt that is made up of metasedimentary, meta-igneous and metavolcanic lithologies, and these intrude the crystalline ice, and the mafic and the felsic rocks are also seen to be comagmatic. So the metasedimentary rocks in this region are predominantly banded iron formation. There's also some peelites and carbonate sequences as well, and they're intruded by the mafic and the felsic magmas. So we have a number of different mafic and ultramafic units that we've identified at Aristarchus, Skews Hill and Acacia East locations, and these range from metaperidotite, metagabbro, proxenite and amphibolite. They're comagmatic with granite and orthoperoxine-bearing granites, and at Aristarchus this is where we have the nickel sulfide mineralisation. We'll hear in more detail about this from Dylan later today, but just wanted to say in a nutshell that the new data that we have for the mafic magmatism suggests that these magmas were intruded at about 2470 million years ago, and they do show metamorphism that ranges from around 2460 to 2400 million years ago. We also have a group of felsic rocks that occur at Acacia East and the Aristarchus deposit or locations, and these include granite, metagranite and the orthoperoxine-bearing granites as well, and we do see that they are comagmatic with the mafic and the ultramafic intrusions, and we have examples of these in our drill core display downstairs when we go and have a look at that later. So the magmatic crystallisation ages we have for these granites are pretty much the same as the mafics, as we would expect, with them showing these comagmatic relationships. And so that's around emplacement ages of around 2470 million years ago, with metamorphism, again, around 2450 to 2430. So we can see that there are similar timelines and sequence of events across this region. So I guess one of the questions is, why do we have nickel and gold deposits sort of in this eastern part and we don't necessarily see them in that western part? So I guess one thing to consider is the nature of the boundaries that constrain this area, And what we see is that they're all shear zones. So there are actually a number of shear zones that dissect this area. So not only separate these three main regions, but also within them we have a number of these quite large shear zones, and they all have a similar trend. They've got this northeast southwest trend, and I guess what's interesting to observe is that the nickel and the gold prospects appear to align in these corridors as well. So perhaps there's some, kind of control with these nature of these boundaries, and the histories that are associated with reactivation or focusing of events along these shear zones. We do know that there is Paleoproterozoic reworking that have occurred in this area. So here we just have an example of a granite that's probably intruded late in the Suffordian orogeny, so that's the top image, and then it's been reworked to a pretty serious myelinite during the Paleoproterozoic, so that's in the lower image. So there's probably tons of examples of relationships like this throughout the Christie domain. We've also found that there is evidence of these younger thermal overprints in a lot of the mafic rocks. So this is some of the work that Dylan's been doing, and this is multi-element apatite geochronology. So this has been able to record those sort of lower temperature events, and the ages that Dylan's been getting in these apatites correspond to the Kimben orogeny. So this is the 1730 to 1690 deformation and metamorphic event, and also some ages consistent with that Hildebrand magmatism in the Mesoproterozoic. So we know that things are moving during the Paleoproterozoic and Mesoproterozoic in this area. So just to wrap up, this is just a simplified time-space diagram just for the region that we've been looking at, with the red, green and the blue zone indicated here. And you can see that there is quite consistent timeline of events across the region. So we have that sedimentation and volcanism early, from around 2440 to perhaps 2500, 2480 million years. And probably in that red zone, there would have been some sedimentation for those granites to, some sediments already there for the granites to intrude into. So just inferred that we had that depositional event over there as well. Fairly consistent magmatic events from around 2490, and then the later phase of magmatism at around 2470. And then this was ultimately terminated by the Sleaford orogeny from around 2460 to 2400. Maybe you could say that there is perhaps a slight younging that's going from that red zone to the blue zone, so from west to east, with that the more eastern side showing those younger ages in the magmatism, and also recording sort of the younger phases of the Sleaford orogeny. In terms of the mineral prospectivity for Challenger, if we consider it to be that epithermal type deposit, then that would place it as forming at perhaps 2520, so when the Christie gneiss was being deposited, or perhaps even related to that 2490 magmatism that we've found within that central zone. If we think about it as being an orogenic system, then that sort of shifts that age to be a bit younger, so perhaps it's more associated with that second phase of magmatism, and that where the onset of the Sleaford orogeny occurred around that 2460, 2450 type of age. It's interesting that that's at that sort of 2470 age, that's when we have the nickel coming into Aristarchus, so is there some kind of relationship between gold and nickel happening at that time? And of course the remobilisation story as well. So we know that at Gulf Bore, for example, we have that potential remobilisation during either the Paleoprote or the Mesoproterozoic, but we're also seeing evidence for remobilised nickel as well. So this is really important for expanding those exploration opportunities, looking for those, those younger systems, and reactivation along those main structures. So that's all I've got for today. So thanks.